if you hear like a baby background.
No, that's totally fine.
Okay.
I will hide non-view participants. Okay, yeah, Paul and Kristen, again, thank you so much for um being willing to participate in this conversation. I feel like it's not every day that we get to speak to such brilliant people. So I personally feel very humbled, and really excited to just talk more about your practices and intentions, just like the scope of work that you do. I mean, I think it's really incredible. Um, and so I guess, Paul, start with you thinking about, am I saying this right? Dikan Center?
Yes, Dikan Center.
Dikan Center. Chris and I were reading and talking about it yesterday, and it's such a phenomenal space. I mean, to have free resources with over what 30,000 books, it really feels unprecedented in a lot of ways. And so I'm really curious about like the personal experiences that informed the creation of that space. And wondering if you can speak a bit about some of the moments or experiences that made you realize that this was something that was needed, and like what some of those initial steps were in making that happen, because it really is such an incredible space.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So it came as a need, right? I started photography 5 years ago. Sold my iPhone, bought a Canon T3i, and I was going to be the photographer in the world, right? In Ghana, the art scene at that time, and even as now, was not a big deal as compared to US. Like, you don't get a Christmas present by getting a camera, right? It's not a thing. So my dream of becoming a photographer, was a struggle, right? And there was no books, there was no resources. I was always watching YouTube tutorials to become a photographer. And fortunately enough, got admission to ICP, right? So whilst I was in ICP, Black student Ghanaian in a class of 25 students, the school has a library, has a dark room, has all that. You're in New York, in the galleries and all that. And I'm like, why doesn't it exist in my world, right? Where I come from, the narratives, like, it's always about the other side. It's always about the other side coming to tell the story, like, from my home country. And also what triggered it most was one day I happened to find pictures of Ghana in my school and in New York Public Library. And these are pictures I've never seen before in my life. And these are pictures of my country, pictures
Yeah.
of my history. It's like, why is it not in my country? Like, why is it not accessible in my country? That I have to come here, 10 hours flight, come and leave, and even live through racism on top of it. And on top of it, it's like, your work is not even accepted here. So it's like, now my activism is, how do I make these things accessible in Ghana? So that nobody can come here to pass through the racism, and the system does not help us, because the curriculum is not for me. The curriculum is the history of America. I'm looking for history of Ghana and Africans and Blacks, right? That is what I relate to much, because it'll solve my problems. Because if I don't know my identity, how do I become who I am? So then I went on this rabbit hole of looking for African books. That's how I started. So I'll go to gallery by gallery, page to page, name them in Chelsea. I knock every door and say, hey, I have a dream. I want to go to Ghana and set up a photo library. And that is the first of its kind in Africa, knocking doors. So I wasn't going well, and I'll go buy work study, $15 an hour. Then I'll go to the secondhand bookstore and then go buy one. Then I went on this rabbit hole little by little. I had 500, 300, my apartment with photo books, and I started getting other donations from other institutions. Howard Greenberg gave me about, I think, 1,000 books. During pandemic, I was in a storeroom packing all the books from them, and went to Philly, went to North Carolina, with a U-Haul truck, buying books with my own money, max out my credit card, storage unit, and all that. So, yeah, that was the beginning.
Yeah.
was
There's so much there to get into, but I'm wondering, Kristen, if there's anything from that resonates with you and the experience that inform your work as a librarian curator, right? Like what for you prompted that need to engage deeper with Black archives and Black photography studies?
It's interesting because it's kind of like the same story in terms of my experience being a student. So I originally went to graduate school to study what they call at NYU visual culture costume studies, which is essentially the history of fashion. But while you're studying the history of fashion, you're really studying the history of images because you're looking at photography, film, like portrait painting. And a lot of the images were like 95% of the images we're looking at is like white European portrait paintings and things like that. And so I was like, I kind of only want to, and like studying the images and understanding the power of those images in terms of like interpreting culture, like politics, gender and sexuality studies and all that stuff. I was like, I think I really want to focus my work on only studying images of Black folks. And so it started kind of really with photography,
Mm-hmm.
really getting more into studying the history of African-American photography from the 19th century on. I had the amazing blessing of taking class with Dr. Deborah Willis, who's written a lot of books about the history of African-American photography. And so that just kind of spiraled into the focus being less about actually even fashion and just more about kind of like the importance of images in terms of like the representation and expression of Black folks across the diaspora. And so I was in my courses trying to focus on studying pictures of Black people. And I was particularly looking into the 19th century. And I had a professor tell me that I couldn't do it because there were no resources to support what I was trying to do. And so I literally, as a response to that, went home and created a bibliography. That was like, actually, these are the sources that exist to help support what I'm doing. And I think she was kind of shocked that I came back to the next class with like these documents. And she was just like, okay, yeah. Like, yeah, you're good. But before that, she kept saying, I don't really understand. Like, what do you like? Whatever. So she was like questioning what I was doing. So that kind of started it. And I was also in the library program at the time because NYU has a dual degree program.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it shifted from me thinking like, I just might want to be a fashion archivist to actually I'm really invested in like thinking more deeply about the history of images as it relates to Black life and being able to be a part of like documenting that history. So yeah.
Yeah. No, that's incredible. I mean, there's something that feels, quintessentially Black in both of these responses. I'm just thinking about the ways in which throughout the diaspora, right? We insist on making a way and making the structures, even if those resources aren't, necessarily present at the beginning. So, I don't know. That's just something that's really impactful in listening to both of you and your insistence on engaging with these archives, finding these resources. I think that's really incredible, and shouldn't be understated. And I'm also thinking about how interdisciplinary it is, right? Like I'm thinking about you, Kristen, as a curator and librarian, but also you, Paul, as a photographer and filmmaker. And I'm wondering how your kind of interdisciplinary awareness informs how you approach archives, right? Like what images or settings or stories are the things that capture your attention? Do you feel like they reflect what you try to archive in your personal life, or is there a distinction there?
I think for me, it's more to do with the sources and influence, right? My source and my influence, if I go deeper, I've been writing extensively. I'm also, by virtue of being, I studied a bit of curation and we have a gallery, so I'm the curator here. And I've been researching a lot, in terms of sources and influence and going back to who I am, what is my source, right? My grandparents were traditional rulers in a small town, right? So when I was a little, they used to tell me oral history of our culture, but never be able to visualize it. So now that I've had access to archives of my great-grandparents who were taken by the British, right? Go deeper into my culture, into what it was, before. So even we currently have an exhibition called Ahimie, which means chieftaincy. So I've been exploring as myself, my sources, to look through the archives, to look through what the chieftaincy and my culture is today, right? So sometimes it's very easy to bundle our lives and just make it, is like everything has to do with our skin color. But before slavery, what was there? We had our own institutions. We had our own culture. We had our own court system. We had all that. So for me, that is the sources, right? My source and my influence as a kid, when my grandparents used to tell me all the stories and all the things they used to do, which is not there anymore. But now what can help me is the archives, which is today, all Ghana archives, because of colonialism, is in BBC. Every one of them. You get the point. Everything, because like it's so difficult to get it. Like these walls, right? And for me, that's why I built this institution, right? So that we could be able to have access to what is ours. You know, back in the day, they used the word take, capture. These are strong words. Like you captured our images, you captured our identity. It's time for me to have those and be able to teach our people and ourselves, like in the 80s, how did we live like? You know, so for me, I think it's my source personally. It comes from my sources, my influence as a Ghanaian, as an Asante man, right? Because sometimes we kind of neglect that. At Yoruba, you know, we had an identity before they just bundle everything and said that you're Black. But then what it was there before. And that is what I'm so curious and working in terms of that.
Yeah. Kristen, do you have thoughts or additions to that as well? I'm thinking about what informs your approach to archives and the kind of images and stories that capture your attention, specifically about representations of Blackness.
Yeah, I feel like I don't know how to answer that question. Like he just answered it so beautifully. I do think I mean, I think what he's saying that also resonates with me is that it's personal. Like I know the kind of like history of like the derogatory images about Black Americans that have been like ingrained in like American culture, but I also personally know like where I come from and the people that I've been surrounded with and grew up around. So I think it's just having that understanding that like there are so many nuanced understandings and representations of Blackness in America that really just inspire me to just like I want to go where the Black people are, like type of thing. And I think in terms of like my curatorial practice, so I started thinking myself really as a curator when I was working in arts education. So before I became a librarian, I worked at university art galleries doing like organizing public programs and doing like arts workshops and things like that. And I was working at institutions where you know, they would do these exhibitions, let's say on French fashion in the 19th century or whatever, but there would be no real like diversity in terms of the representations of like voices in the exhibition. So I became the person that was like, they labeled me doing something called like a contemporary like program curating series where I would kind of like do research on what they were doing, and then like the gaps would kind of become apparent to me, and then I would fill in the gaps with my programming to bring more like diverse like contemporary voices into thinking about material culture or whatever. So I think like that's like naturally just a part of my practice, like just paying attention to what's not being said and trying to like fill in those gaps, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Doing it perfectly every time, but I think and not even thinking of myself as like the expert on any of these things, but really being curious about ways that we can have different kinds of conversations, and then bringing in the people that I know have the knowledge to then speak to like how we can expand and broaden the conversation.
Yeah.
I kind of see myself as like more of like a facilitator, curator, like type of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Paul, would you agree as well? Do you kind of see yourself as a facilitator, curator?
Yeah, so I always say that Dikan is a platform, right? I never envisioned a Dikan as something which is mine. I built a platform that everybody can have a place, right? I'm just so to make it more In our culture, we have the linguist, and that's how I see myself, right? I'm not the Ken, right? I'm just the linguist, the one who facilitates to get those information or platform for people to, and I see that one. So
Yeah, I love that, and it makes me think of something that's been a through line, Kristen, in the Action Query exhibition at Pace and the work that you've done with the bibliography, in thinking about Black knowledge production as a form of communal action. And so I wonder if you could speak a little bit more, both of you speak a little bit more about this theme of communal action, and how that informs the work that you've done, the work that you've been doing with the reading room, maybe at Pace, and thinking about curating environments, but also the kind of communal action that produced and sustains the Dikan Center. Like how does communal action play a role in how you're thinking about what it means to make knowledge and resources accessible?
I think I can start in that, like picking up kind of on what I just said. Like I've never seen it as just me. Like even this idea of like being a scholar and being in academia, like it's kind of uncomfortable to me. Like I don't want to be the expert. I want to like be in dialogue with other folks and like co-create things. And so yeah, with the reading room, especially like the idea that Pace Gallery is this incredible like international institution that has this abundance of resources, but that is closed off to the public, was just really curious to me. And then in thinking about also the work of the two folks, Howard Ramsey and Carolyn Fowler, that inspired me, like the impetus of both of their projects was based on community, right? Like she was like noticing what was happening around her in the 70s around the arts movement, and just started and was like, I think I need to collect the materials of my peers. And then like her friends and her students knew that she was doing this work and got curious about it, and everyone was sharing it and talking about it amongst themselves. And then that just kind of like became the platform for then wanting to like share it with more community and more folks. So I don't know if I'm answering the question, but it just kind of feels natural to me to include community, to like
Yeah.
always be like in dialogue with other folks, and to be working in community. And I really just wanted, even if it's only for 1 month, to be able to like make the library space at Pace more accessible to a wider audience of people. And it not being like, and it not feel like you have to be an expert to enter the space. Like you can just be curious and sit in the space and feel comfortable enough to just sit and look and wonder and imagine, and not feel like you have to already know so much about whatever artist to enter the space. So
Yeah, I love that distinction. Like you don't need to be an expert to be in this space. That curiosity is enough. Um, yeah, that's really beautiful and brilliant to me, Kristen. Thank you. Um, Paul, do you have any thoughts or reflections on that?
yeah, I mean, she said it right. Like, for me, we literally had a meeting for 3 hours in a week, right? Different days, 1 hour, 1 hour, just for this topic, right? Because the moment we trying as a team to not use certain languages here, so that people don't think that I need to be an expert to be at Dikan Center. I need to be a photographer to be there. I just need to be curious. So when she said that, I now know a tagline we're going to use. And I know a whole bunch of documentary, short videos we're going to use, because we're using media. So we are a visual education institution, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're constantly using the media, pictures, videos to communicate to people, right? So we're going to do a short documentary. You just have to be curious. You don't need to be, so those are some of the things. And for me, building community is what we live with off, right? It's easy to build a building. Getting the books now has become easy for me, right? Right now, in a matter of five weeks, I can get a book from New York to here. One of the easiest things I could do. But what is the relevance of those books? The space. how, so even with us, I have friends who are architects. So our conversation is always that. So our building is a 2 facility, and the compound I designed bench, which anyone can come and sit here for free, no free Wi-Fi, whether you're a photographer or not. And every time I come here, is so much joy to see people who are not photographers using the space. You know, today we had a group of 30 kids come around for our visual literacy program. And it was my happiest time. Like, you know, I was so happy with the kids. And that is what community is.
Yeah.
Agree. And it's also making me think of something. I know that you've talked to me a lot about Jamoke, this idea of reciprocity. And I really see like educational experiences as a reciprocal process. Like, I think we spend a lot of time going through an education system where we're being talked at, and like the professor is like this beacon of knowledge, and we're just all supposed to sit there and like soak it up. But even when I worked in arts education, a lot of the way I was trained to think about it is a conversation. Like, I'm not just giving you a tour of an exhibition and I'm going to tell you all the things I think you should know. I'm going to ask you questions about what you see and what you feel and how it relates to you, who you are, so that we can, I guess, build this new way of thinking about the work together and come to our own conclusions about like what it means and its value, which I know is something else we also talked about. But
Yeah. I wonder if you can speak a little bit more about this theme of visual education, right? Because it is something that's present and feels like a focus in both of your works and practices. Why do you feel so passionately about visual education, focusing on that, or aesthetics or movement? Why is that significant?
Okay, I'll go first. I think it's a way of life. I think visual education is a way of life. I think it's definitely the way and one of the best tools and system of education, right? I think that using visual education to teach can solve a lot of problems, right? And it has vivid facts, right? It has clear understanding of what could be used, right? For example, videos, pictures, these are clear, ways and tools. And one of the things I'll tell you is that we started a pilot program using the visual literacy program and went to a school. We've adopted 7 schools so far. And when we went through the school, we used a projector, we showed the work. And in a week, the attendance of the school shot up 100%. Nobody missed a class.
Wow.
All because we turned one classroom into a media room. And we're showing pictures, videos of things, and the kids loved it, right? So if you think about it, it's like how impactful that could be. My background was like, I grew up with having electricity for the first 15 years of my life. And when I found wildlife, that was my entry. And it made a huge imprint in my head. So all the time I wanted to know. So I've been a huge fan of National Geographic. In our library, we have National Geographic books from 1952 to now. You see how that impact of one thing I watched 15 years ago has made in my life today. So I think visual education is a way of life. And in Africa, purposely, it can change and transform a lot of things. Because, example, if you think about climate change, it's always talked about, but never visualized.
Wow,
and in
yeah.
that context, how would you be able to use that to educate people about climate change, or use that to be able to advocate for that? So for me, I think visual education is a way of life and a way to solve African problems.
Yeah, that's
I
brilliant.
agree. That's it. Yeah. I think so much of the messaging that's ingrained in us is through images, like images on TV, images in books. Like, it's just the imagery really, like, yeah. But yeah, I agree with everything he was saying. So I'll just leave that. Yeah.
I'm this is making me think of an experience I had when I was teaching once. And I was teaching broadly about West African history, right? And so I asked the students just to Google, right? Just for the sake of exercise, right? Google Africa and what visuals come up, right? And it was so disheartening to see some of the same stereotypical derogatory images. And it made me realize that if that was the only resource that these students had to engage with their conceptions of Africa, with their conceptions of Blackness, with their conceptions of Africanness, it would be through this distorted lens that isn't a depiction of reality, right? And so I think that's also something that's so important about the archival work that you both are doing and the resources that you're making available. It's a way to kind of offset this this legacy of anti-Blackness. And it also makes me wonder who are the Black photographers, Black visual artists who have informed your perception and informed your work.
You go first.
I'm sure there are many, but who feels present
There
for you?
are so many. Well, Torkwasi Dyson, who just so amazingly is represented by Pace and agreed to have a work in the reading room, has been incredibly impactful to me in terms of thinking about like how she can she's thinking about these very deep kind of like historic memories around Blackness and Black experience, whether it be like her specific things like Henry Box Brown and him shipping himself to freedom literally in a box to Philadelphia, or Harriet Jacobs, who escaped slavery, I believe, by hiding in like this little space. And I think her mother or grandmother's attic, and being able to kind of take those, then to use those forms as a way. And I think also in this use of repetition to create these, I don't know if it's like abstract works, but I guess turning like these big conceptual ideas around Blackness and then simplifying it into these like simple forms is something that's been really impactful to me, versus like what I guess could be considered more representational works of Blackness. And so that's been really influential to me. But also Deborah Willis, so I've mentioned before, like, I really don't know if I'd be able to think about images the way I think about them without her. Like, when I discovered her, before I even like finessed my way into her class, I literally went to the library and looked at every single book that I could find that she edited or wrote about Black photography, or even her thinking about the representations of the Black body in different kinds of media has been really impactful to me. Another artist that's been really impactful to me too is Theaster Gates. I just love the way he uses the archive in his artistic practice, even in terms of like bringing monuments from other spaces into a space and having us like interact with that in a particular way. And so yeah, those are some artists that come to mind.
I think for me, would be not much. Maybe I'm a huge fan of Gordon Park's works, right? Using images for social justice, and yeah. So I think those, and Deborah Willis is one of my favorite also as well in terms of her works, and writings about
Yeah. And Paul, are there any like specifically think about African photographers as well? Folks who feel
Yes.
like who are so essential to how we should understand visual images, but maybe aren't as well known in the Americas.
Yes, James Barnor is one of them, from Ghana. I'm a huge fan of his work. We've been trying as much as, oh gosh, knows when to try to get his work here in Ghana. It's like so difficult, right? And it's like you think about James Barnor worked so hard. He's one of the photographers whose work is out there, and you think about it's like how accessible, so difficult that I have to pay $250 to get his book in my library, so. And then also some photographers in South Africa, who and in Mali as well. Malik said also his work is incredible over the years in terms of studio, and yeah. So those are my favorite, one of the things is James Banner. He's incredible. He's able to document Ghana, represent Ghana in a way which is so beautiful. And yeah.
Yeah. I want to go. Oh, so go ahead.
I also wanted to add to, like, when he said vision and justice, it made me think of Sarah Lewis, who literally just spearheaded an entire project around vision and justice, and like connecting the lineage from 19th century, thinking about it from like Frederick Douglass in the 19th century and his writings on vision and justice, after he gained freedom all the way up into the present. So she's also really influential to me too.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know that point about lineage is making me think again about your work in Pace's archives and exploring this genealogy of Black artistry that's been present over a 60-year period. And so I guess I'm wondering, what were some of the things that surprised or intrigued or maybe concerned you as you're looking through these archives? I know that, Paul, you were also informed by Pace's archives and thinking about the Dikan Center. And so wondering if you could speak to some of the things from Pace that informed that space, but also some of the key distinctions that you were thinking of when you were thinking about Dikan Center and what you wanted for it.
Repeat that question again. The internet doesn't sound.
Yeah, so I was just saying that I know that part of Dikan Center was informed by Pace's research and archives and department, just like the library. And I'm wondering, what specifically informed Dikan Center, but also where you were intentional about the distinctions. Be like, oh, this is cool, but for here we want to do something else. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so for me, yeah, it makes sense. When I was thinking about, I'm a dreamer. I dream. I had sketches of the building I want to build even before I got all my books. I had a clear vision where I want. So I was looking through online and looking for, buildings, and Pace Gallery's building was so beautiful. It had all these compartments and all these spaces, and well, really built. And and whenever I'm in Chelsea, I would just go to galleries, and I went to Pace Gallery, and it was one of the only galleries around which had this white giant wall with a big table, and they had this office there. And for me, that, apart from my CP library, that was the only library which kind of was different. And I was like, whole, like, giant, and it's like, I love books. I love photo books. I love art books. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to do exactly the same thing in Ghana, all white, and have this big table, So I took a lot of pictures, videos, and there was a guy over there. I talked to him. It's like, how do you source the books? How did you get these books? How can I get donations of you guys? And it was beautiful in the sense that you go to the gallery and you come to the book session, and I didn't know how accessible that was. I asked him, like, can I sit and read this book or go through this book? And I kind of a sense that, it's for the gallery. It's not something for you. Like, so it's kind of like I kept coming back and forth, bothering him, like, can I take the books? Can I see which one is this? Like, kind of like saying, like, dude, just, I told you, like, this is not. I said, well, can I get your email? Can I email you? It's like, I emailed him back maybe probably 5 times, and I think he gave up on me. Like, but for me, it was inspirational that I wanted to have something like that in Ghana, right? And make it accessible, that it's not just for the curators, it's not just for the workers at the gallery. Most galleries, I mean, to be honest with you, that is what they're meant for, like, for research purposes. But for me, it's like, okay, can we make it accessible for everybody as well to look, because you guys have some of the most incredible collections in the world. Like, and for me, it's a pain. If I look at now, we have a section, we divided the library into 2. All Black books, African Americans, African books, and then all the rest, right? And then the rest is more than the Black books. We have a lot of books, but the books we have are not, and the books we want, which is the Black books, it's expensive. It's ridiculously expensive, and I don't have that money to have all that. So now, even Black History Month, right now, we're going to try to do a social media campaign to get some book drive to see on our wish list what people can buy for us or whatever. But because this year our target is to have the Black section filled up, which is literally one more. So for me, that was my entry to know that it was possible and be able to do that. So yeah.
Yeah. I definitely want to return to this point on accessibility because I think there's a lot there. But Kristen, for you, what was it like getting into those archives?
It was amazing. I mean, I think like I started the process with this intense document that Pace has of their entire exhibition history over the past 60 years. And so it was frankly overwhelming in the beginning because I didn't know where to start, and they have the library on 25th Street, but then they also have like an archive uptown somewhere. So it's like, like just trying to figure out where to go and where to start. But what was amazing, so I just started basically with researching every artist on the list to try to figure out where I wanted to go from there if something stood out to me. But what was amazing during the process was being able to see how many books that they actually do have about Black artists, as well as the different formats of the books. Like some of them, like there's some self-published things, like Adam Pentleton might have had just like a Xerox version of something. And then, so they'll have that version, but then they also have like the final version of it, which was published by a publisher. But then also being able to discover that there are other books that they do have about Black artists that aren't necessarily connected to the artists they represent. So like my understanding was that they only were collecting things about artists that they represent. But just from like skimming the shelves, there are actually books in there about like Alma Thomas and just like other amazing artists that I didn't think they would have. I think they had a Malik Sidibe book, and I'm like, they don't really represent photographers. So like that was interesting to me. So at first I was trying to grapple with how do I include those books and those folks as well. But then it got too big, so I just focused on the exhibition list. But yeah, so it was really just it felt nice to see that they were collecting in some other areas too, like photography, even though they don't necessarily represent photographers.
Yeah. No, and I feel like looking through your bibliography, I just had a greater sense of like the expansiveness and scale of the archive. Like it really is yeah, it really is striking. Um I do want to go back to this point about accessibility, right? Because I think it's something that's really interesting. One of the things that was most striking to me reading about the Dikan Center, um, when you think about spaces like galleries or libraries, because they don't have this admissions fee, right? There's no initial cost. Um, so like barrier of entry, right? But I'm wondering like what else is needed to make an institutional space accessible, sorry. Because we know that like being able to walk in the door, or like you said, I think earlier, Paul, um, a building is different than a community, right? And so it can be free to enter the building, but that doesn't necessarily make the community. As you all are thinking about archives and thinking about spaces that hold archives, spaces that hold images, spaces that hold stories, what is needed to make those spaces accessible and communal beyond being free?
I think it depends on how the space is designed, right?
Say the same thing.
How the place is designed. I will say, when after this, I'll send you pictures of my place so you have a sense of how the place is. So I got two old buildings and never moved a tree. Everything intact. So the building is a house.
Well,
so the garage and the living room is converted to the gallery. The living room is the classroom. The master bedroom is the library. The gate into the library is like a corridor to the place. The outside is the bench, entries and all that. The offices at the back where the boys' quarters, right? Outside, you have the original thing there, like the gate, the wall, everything kept it intact. because my idea started from day one is community, a home. So most of the time they started trying to put the word around. They said Dikan is a home of storytelling. I never said that. They are saying it. The library, like, funny enough, like when people come in the library, all you hear the first time is wow. Like, wow. And I love it. I love it. Like every time I hear that, you can see that people's expectation. Like the library is a home library. That's how we designed it. The floor, all that, the table, how the benches are, is not the biggest, but that's the prototype to what it will become. Right. So for me, is the space and what you make the space of, and the people. So my team, when everybody comes here, thank you for coming. Is there any way I can help you? Everyone. And now the library is becoming a hub on Saturday morning and Sundays for people. Sometimes when I come back Sunday and you're having interesting conversations which are not related to just the books. They're having, like, some conversation during Christmas, like, break. We're averaging 200 to 300 people a day. And people will just leave the library, go sit outside, and they from different parts of the world, and they have these conversations. I'm not trying to control anything. I'm just trying to build community, and whatever they tend the place to be, that is the joy.
Wow.
Right? Whatever, so now even we're trying as much as possible in terms of accessibility. We are trying to get donations of iPads and computers, right? So we put the iPads in the library. I cannot bring everything from US to Ghana, but in terms of technology, your research pays gallery, their research, their archives, they are digitalized. Hey, can you give us accessibility to this so that we can put on it? When somebody comes, the person will have that same feeling or that same access that somebody entering Pace Gallery has. For example, the reading room. Not the Ghanaians here, we can have access to it. But if there's document that we'll post it, like, hey, today when you come from this month, we have these materials on the iPad, you can access them free of charge. That is accessibility. That is what you share with people. That is what you do to build these communities and say that I am here at Dikan Center, but I feel like I'm at Pace Gallery Reading Room.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's it. That's what community is all about. Accessibility. Because without those accessibilities, the walls will be so high, right? But if you bring these accessibilities, and that's why for us, our strategy is also using technology, right? And again, it doesn't cost much. Sometimes when I'm talking to BBC saying, what do you lose? You have terabytes of these things. Why are you, like, what do you lose? Tell me.
Yeah.
I told them in the meeting, what do you lose to give the work to Africans, Ghanaians, to see what you documented? You lose nothing. You have so much resources. Share them. The other institutions, so for us, what we've done also is that we have 10 institutions across Ghana, Africa today, where we're supporting them. So when I get the books, I can keep 30,000 books. It's too much stress. So we ship them, go to other places, form other libraries across Africa. My goal is in the next 10 years, have these 20 institutions, not 20 Dikans, 20 institutions of their own, independent of their own, that can give accessibility to every single person. And for us, the prototype, we call it prototype here. We document everything. So we come up with a prototype that somebody can have the same thing in Kenya, Nigeria, all that. And that is where you spread the whole thing, that everybody can have access to visual education.
Yeah, I love that. There's so much there. I know I just especially want to name, like, I love that distinction between a prototype and a franchise. Like you're saying, we don't want 20 Dikans, right? We want people to be able to use this as a template to build what will be effective for them in their local communities. Like, I think that's so important. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts? Yeah, Kristen, go ahead.
No, I'm just like, for me, it's the same thing. Like, Even as someone who's curated in galleries, I still have moments where I go to the Met or wherever and still don't completely feel comfortable. And I think that the environment does have a lot to do with it, which is why my intention from the very beginning, when I was reading out to y'all what I wanted the space to be, I said I want it to feel like a familiar space, like a living room. I want people to feel like it's not just like I'm peeking my head in to see what's happening, but I have to leave. Like I want people to feel like they can sit for a while. And so that was really the intention behind like the couch and the chairs and all of that. And the plants, like just to make it feel more like home, a home space. So yeah, I agree with everything he was saying.
Now I want to come to New York.
You should. We should. I really want to come to Dikan Center. Like,
How long is the going to be? How long is it going to be? The reading room?
it's going to be up through February, so just until the end of the month.
Oh, I'm missing.
Yeah, but again, it speaks to like archives, right? And how do we document these things in a way that they can be used as prototypes elsewhere, right? Like, how can what the reading room as exists at Pace be implemented in other
That's
places?
true. That's true. Honestly, that's true. It can be possible.
Yeah,
It could be
I know
possible.
exactly. It can be possible. It really can be.
Yeah, it can be possible. Easily, easily. We can turn our whole gallery. We don't have a show currently. After this, we can. Yeah, it's possible. Now I have an idea.
I know we're kind of getting close to time, so I just want to ask two more questions. Something that's been so enriching and honestly moving for me about this conversation, um, is thinking about the implications of both of these spaces, both of these archives for diasporic audiences, right? Um, and I'm wondering for both of the projects that y'all been working on, what is the impact that you want, the Dikan Center, the bibliography, the exhibition, to have for diasporic Black and African audiences? Like, what do you want it to prompt for us?
That you belong anywhere that you are or anywhere that you want to be, for me, really. Like, and I think it goes back to the accessibility piece. Like, yeah, that our stories are important, that we belong wherever we are. And just to encourage people to keep creating and to keep imagining and to continue to keep being curious.
Yeah.
Yep. I think you see, you can only, talking from the perspective of non-accessible places like Ghana, right? You can only dream or you can only be curious when you see them or you have access to them. If you don't know what is there. You don't even know what is possible. I have to come to New York to know what is possible in Ghana, right? I have to be in the school. I have to see, oh, wow, So when I was in school, I did 42 courses. I was going to school every single day. I was like a kid in the candy shop because I don't have it here. So when I'm in the classes, I'm paying attention. It's like I wasn't coming to mess up because this is my only opportunity. So I was curious, like literally, I'll go to the classroom with a presentation. I'll research on the lecturer. I'll research on the courses, right? And for me, that was the thing. And that's why I'm so heavy on making visual education accessible. That's it. That's my mission. How do I make visual education accessible? And through that process, through those means, people can dream, people can be curious, people can actually imagine that this is possible.
Yeah. I think that's a beautiful place to end. Thank you both so much. I mean, this has really been such a enriching conversation. And honestly, looking forward to ways for future possibilities of future collaboration. I think.